As soon as I bought the country house, my son called and said, "Mom, wait for us this evening. I'm coming with my wife and 20 of her relatives. Cook the food, prepare the rooms, we'll stay with you for a couple of weeks." Quote, I didn't answer, but I already knew how I would teach my guests a lesson. When they arrived, such a surprise awaited them that they remembered it for a long time. And before we continue, please write what country you are from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. Lydia Petrovna looked at the key with the green tag for a long time. It lay heavy and cool in her palm, like a promise that could finally be fulfilled. The silence in the yard smelled of damp boards, apple bark and fresh paint on the window frames. The house was small, one-story, with a light veranda and short steps to the garden path. Pots of geraniums, brought from a city apartment, were already standing on the windowsill. It was as if two old friends had moved in with their owner. The realtor said goodbye, took a photo of smiling Lydia on the porch and left. The area became completely quiet. The silence was not empty, but filled. You could hear the door knocking in the barn, a sparrow landing on a perch under the roof, and the clanking of a trunk closing somewhere in the distance. Lydia put her bag on the bench, took a broom and walked along the veranda. With every speck of dust flying over the threshold, the feeling for which she had bought the house entered her. Everything would be according to her rules here. She put the kettle in the kitchen, adjusted the gas, checked the fire, took out of her bag a small tea set that she had been saving since her time working at school, and sat down at the table. New towels were neatly laid out in the closet. On the shelf were 3 jars of cereals brought from the city. There is milk, butter and cottage cheese in the fridge. On the windowsill, the gray cat neighbor had already stretched out along the glass and was looking at us with distrust, as she looks at those who have not yet been entered into the local map. Her phone vibrated. Her son's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, hi," Andre said cheerfully. "How is your nest?" It was quiet, light and almost clean. All that was left was to wipe the windows and hang the curtains. "Great. Then listen to the news. We'll be there in the evening." Lydia smiled. "Who are you?" "Me, Ira and ours." "Well, how about ours, Ira's relatives?" "About 20 people, no more," Andre laughed. "We just need some air and a reboot. Cook the food, prepare the rooms, we'll stay with you for a couple of weeks. You don't mind, do you?" Lydia listened in silence. Her head was calm, without fuss. The words in the evening, 20 and a couple of weeks, were sorted out. Behind them were numbers, the amount of bed linen, pillows, plates, water in the well, septic tank, exhaust hood, gas consumption. Behind the numbers were her own strengths and what she wanted from this house. "Okay," she said. "See you in the evening." "Great. We'll be there around 9. Don't worry, we're not picky. The main thing is that there's food and a place to sleep. The rest is unimportant." "I understand," Lydia replied. "I'll take the food and places into account." She hung up, not letting the words flow any further. She went to the window and ran a rag along the windowsill. She wasn't angry. There was a clear, cold feeling, like water from a well. Clean, strong, invigorating to the point of trembling. She took a notebook out of her bag, sat down at the table and began to write. In the heading, she carefully wrote out the house rules. Below, in points. First, the territory is private. Overnight stays and residence only by agreement with the owner. Second, food and consumables are bought according to the list. We chip in equally. We keep the receipts. Third, quiet hours on the site are from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. and after 10 p.m. neighbors nearby, children are sleeping. Fines are real. Fourth, we take care of water. The well provides the norm. The septic tank is not elastic. Shower by time, washing machine by schedule. Fifth, everyone does their part. Duty, kitchen, dishes, plot, bathhouse. Table on the refrigerator. Sixth, alcohol only in reasonable limits and only in the house. Fires according to the rules. Barbecue on a concrete slab. Seventh, we pay for damage to property immediately. Eighth, those who are not ready to comply, choose a hotel in the city. I will tell you the addresses. Then she took out clean sheets of paper and printed 5 copies on the printer. One for the gate, one for the front door, one for the refrigerator, one for the living room, and one for the door to the bathhouse. Next to it she attached a duty table and a shopping list, where she highlighted pillows and linen with a limited supply on a separate line. At the bottom she wrote, "Welcome." She smiled at this school joke and put the date. Lydia called her neighbor. Nikolai Ivanovich, a former military man and the main volunteer on the entire street, laughed into the phone. "Lydia Petrovna, let's switch to camp mode." "We'll have to. I'll drop by in the evening, introduce myself and explain about the septic tank. Otherwise it would be a shame if people from the city thought that everything was going into space without consequences." "Please come in," she answered. "Say it without jokes. You have a persuasive voice." By 9 p.m. the gates hummed and opened. The first car drove in, followed by the second, then the third. The doors slammed like castanets. People poured out onto the gravel, talking to each other, pulling packages and bags. The noise rose like steam from a cooking pot. Irina walked ahead. Tall, well-dressed, with the firm gaze of a person accustomed to distributing other people's resources around herself. She awkwardly hugged her mother-in-law and stepped back, glancing around the house, then the plot. "So, we're staying with you for 2 weeks, she said. "Oh, no offense, but here we'll have to up the ante. Andre, bring in an extra refrigerator. Put the barbecue over there. Where are our family bedrooms? 2 rooms for us, 2 for the parents. Where are the kids?" Lydia smiled. "Good evening. Let's start small. I ask everyone to come into the living room. The tea has already boiled. My conversation is short but polite." The guests exchanged glances. In the room, they encountered the first surprise. On the door hung a sheet of house rules, printed out brightly and clearly. Below was a duty sign. On the table stood an empty tray. Next to it was a stack of disposable cups, a pack of tea, sugar, and a note. "Whoever brews, pours. Whoever drinks, washes." "What's this?" asked one of Irina's relatives. "Have we ended up in a children's camp?" "Better," answered Lydia. "You've ended up in a living house, where there's a place for everyone, if they're ready to occupy it. I didn't invite anyone, but I'm not kicking anyone out. In return, I ask you to respect my boundaries. The rules are on the sheet. If someone is not ready in the city, there are 3 hotels. I wrote down the addresses and phone numbers. I can call a taxi. The decision is yours." "Mom, this is a bit harsh," said Andre, looking from the sheet to his mother. "It's fair," said Lydia. "I bought a house to live in peace. Don't be afraid, I'm kind." Quote. But kind does not mean free and unlimited. Irina tried to smile. "We are a family." "Especially," answered Lydia. "A family is when they ask, they notify." Nikolai Ivanovich appeared at the place, said hello, took off his cap, sat down at the table, put his boots next to him. Briefly, he said, "The water is from the well. The septic tank is pumped out by a machine on call and for money. We throw into the toilet only what is supposed to. If you didn't know about it, now you know. If you don't want to know, the hotels in the city are good. The owner has an economy class washing machine. There isn't enough drum for everyone, so we sign up for the list. We only wash what is necessary. Be careful with the fire. The winds walk around here. We smoke on the veranda. Put cigarette butts in a jar of water. It's not hard for me to remind you twice, but the 3rd time the local police officer does. He's nice, but strict." The room became quiet for a second. The pulse of the conversation froze. Someone whistled, someone looked at Irina. She, raising her chin, nodded reservedly. "Okay," she said. "Let's see how you do it here." "Excellent," answered Lydia. "Then we'll start with just groceries. I've prepared the basics for today, but there's a list for tomorrow and beyond. We'll chip in. I'll explain the kitchen routine in the morning. Rooms. I have 6 beds. The rest get air mattresses and their own blankets. If there are none, I can give a couple, but not 20. Take turns showering. There's enough warm water for everyone, if you do not confuse a shower with the sea. And the last thing, I have a plan for tomorrow. I need to dig up the garden bed, weed the strawberries and patch up the fence of the neighbor's fence. I will be grateful to everyone who pitches in. Those who do not want to, do not want to. I do not force, but then do not ask for fried meat every 2 hours and do not be surprised that the dishes do not wash themselves. The guests exchanged glances. Just yesterday, many of them came here with a picture of a tourist center. White tablecloth, endless food, a purring cat, and a hostess who smiles and offers more. Now they were offered a different reality, in which we arrived, not equal to us. Oh. Mom, can we do without these tables? Andre tried to soften. Yes, we can, said Lydia. I'm taking down the tables. You're going to a hotel or staying and checking in. I'm calm in both cases. Quote. The pause lasted a second, then another second, and then suddenly a wave moved. The woman in the bright scarf was the first to speak. Let me go to the kitchen. I can do it quickly and cleanly. Where are your knives? Quote. A man with broad shoulders followed her. I'm taking the shovel in my hands, confidently. I'm going to pick strawberries, the teenage girl said emotionlessly. It's meditative, and my mother and I will inflate the mattresses, another relative spoke up. Irina sighed, took out her phone and said, Okay, give me the grocery list and money. I will transfer my part and Andre. Quote. Two men at the door exchanged glances and went to smoke on the veranda. Nikolai Ivanovich whispered to them on the way, just don't forget the can. Smoking was also part of the rules here. Lydia put on the tea, laid out the plates, and the house came alive not with a holiday, but with work, from which people's voices become more equal. At 10 p.m. there was soup on the table, a bowl of salad and a large frying pan of potatoes. There was no restaurant shine, but there was a calm satiety. After the meal, Lydia stood up, clapped her hands and said, Thank you all. Tomorrow we get up at 8. We start at 9 o'clock. Quote. One of the guests whispered, It's a vacation. Someone snorted, but most nodded. A simple miracle happened to them. Nothing supernatural was demanded of them, only respect and participation. The morning began with the smell of fresh bread and damp grass. Lydia got up at 6 o'clock, put the kettle on, went out to the well. She picked it up, poured some water into the watering can and watered the rose by the porch. The rose endured the move steadfastly, but was thirsty. At 8, the first volunteers were in the kitchen. A teenage girl named Kira was silently cutting cucumbers. A woman in a bright scarf, whose name was Svetlana, was frying pancakes and joking about the taste of childhood without her mother's screams. Half an hour later, the men pulled themselves together. Andre sleepily rubbed his eyes. Irina appeared collected, and her hairdo had not changed, as if the night had spent not on an inflatable mattress, but on a feather bed. At the table, Lydia talked through the plan. A garden bed, a picket fence, grocery shopping. Almost everyone transferred the money. Two of them made excuses, saying that they had left their cards at home. Lydia smiled kindly and handed over a sheet of paper with the addresses of hotels. They accept cash there, they have a cash register. Two of them looked at each other and took out their phones. The transfers arrived in a minute. I'm in the kitchen today. Andriusha and Petrovich are on the fence. Kiri, Erie's strawberries, shopping, Svetlana distributed, looking back at Lydia. Right, the hostess nodded. Only Petrovich in the first half of the day to my garden. His back works better before noon. Andre, don't forget the gloves. I'll give Irina the list. We'll keep the receipts. Mom, this is accounting, Andre grinned. This is respect for someone else's wallet, Lydia answered calmly. I have more than one, and I have only one. Irina took the list, ran her eyes over it and said, I'll add a couple of items. Lydia leaned over. Add. Just not on the general budget, but on your own. The house is not a restaurant. He doesn't like excesses. He has a country stomach. Quote, I understand, the daughter-in-law said dryly. The plot was buzzing with activity. The shovel sank into the ground like into a dense pie. Kira crawled along the garden bed with headphones, but her face showed that she had not disconnected from the world, but simply shielded her ears from irritating voices. Andre and the chairman of the family council for fences, Petrovich, argued about which side to nail the rail on, but the argument was a work-related one, like the friction of wheels on rails. At noon, Nikolai Ivanovich drove up a wheelbarrow and said loudly so that everyone could hear, "Lunch is scheduled, then quiet hour. Whoever wants to continue, continues, but without noise. Whoever wants to sleep, sleeps. Whoever wants to talk, whispers." His voice was not an order, but as if a reminder from the body about the correct posture. In the afternoon, there was a conflict. Two of Irina's relatives slammed the door to the shower and connected the hairdryer, washing machine and kettle at the same time. The machines turned off the entire house. For a second, the silence became dense, and then there were shouts, "Your electricity is weak." Lydia came in, turned on the emergency switch, lowered the handle, pulled the hairdryer and kettle out of the socket, showed the notice above the switch, where in large letters it was written, "Only turn on one device at a time." And she said calmly, "Is it difficult for you to read or difficult to listen? If both are difficult, I will call a taxi to the hotel." Quote, the women exchanged glances. "We did not know." "Now you know," answered Lydia. By evening, the Shtaknik stood straight as a soldier on a line. Kira brought a bowl of strawberries, said nothing, but in the end she smiled with the corner of her lips in a teenage way. Svetlana set the table with soup, stewed vegetables and a plate with simple sandwiches. Irina brought the groceries, put the receipts in a file and silently handed them to Lydia. "Thank you," said the mother-in-law. At night, when the rustling of footsteps died down and the house sank into that very village sleep that smells of grass and wood, Lydia woke up from her thoughts. They did not disturb, they simply stood in a row. She thought about her son, when he began to step over her plans so easily. She thought about Irina. What was inside this strong woman, except for inertia? "Do you owe me?" She thought about herself. How important it was to say no without raising her voice. She turned on her side and fell asleep. The house breathed evenly, like a child after a walk. On the third day, it became clear that some of the relatives had come to rest and were ready to live by the rules, and some had come to the all-inclusive sanatorium. And were tired of having to turn on themselves here. Two men quietly left in the morning, citing urgent work. The woman in shiny sneakers said she was allergic to the village and went to the hotel, sending the couriers a box of cakes to make peace. Lydia took the box, put it in the refrigerator and wrote on the lid, "Tea for breakfast." The house was inhabited. That same day, the village police officer came, the same one Nikolai Ivanovich had mentioned, young but with attentive eyes. He asked if the residents were bothering their neighbors. Irina, gathering all her pride, said that they were cultured people. The police officer nodded and said, "Then please sign the sheet that you are familiar with the rules of silence, so that there will be no offense later." Everyone signed. The paper strangely relieved the tension that remained after the first clashes. Paper and order are sometimes softer than any conversation. In the evening, it began to rain. On the concrete slab near the barbecue, the water collected in smooth puddles. Lydia brought out a large kettle and said, "No shashlik today. Firstly, it's windy. Secondly, the firewood is damp. Thirdly, it's nap time at the neighbors with the baby." Quote, and she added, smiling, "We'll leave the wish for tomorrow, it'll taste better that way." At this time, Svetlana was in the kitchen showing Kira how to wash a mountain of plates quickly and quietly. Kira said little, but her movements were quick and precise. Their common reflection appeared in the mirror above the sink. Two women of different ages, equally collected in a special female craft, to see it through to the end. Irina, standing in the doorway, looked and seemed to be trying to understand why her plan to come and relax was cracking, but not falling apart. For the first time in these days, she approached Lydia without a demand, just like that, and asked, "Isn't it hard for you?" Lydia answered, "It's hard if you pull someone else's, but if you pull it together, it's easier." Irina nodded silently. At night, the wind blew, tore the outer boards from the picket fence and threw them toward the barn. Andrei and Nikolai Ivanovich were awakened by a knock. They went out in raincoats and spent half an hour fastening the slats in the rain. In the morning, Lydia made them strong coffee, set the table and said one phrase, "Thank you." And that was better than any big words. By evening, Andre called the city hotel for the first time himself and booked 2 rooms for our noisy part. He came to the mainland and said almost officially, "We paid in advance." I realized that the house is not a recreation center. Quote. Lydia listened and answered, "I'm glad you said that. No offense." Quote. He nodded, looked at the duty sign and asked, "Can I go to the kitchen tomorrow?" "I'm not very good at it, but I'll try." Quote. "It's possible," she said. On the 7th day, Lydia had a sudden small victory. In the evening, the neighbors from the 3rd plot, a middle-aged woman and man, knocked on the door. The woman said, "You are a good example. We never thought that guests could be controlled." The man added, "This table brought them to the light." They laughed, but the laughter was respectful. Lydia invited them for tea, and they got to talking. 2 weeks passed, like water in a well. It was scooped out slowly and returned again, if you are not lazy. The house stood, the people changed. Not everything and not at once. Someone left on the 3rd day, someone came a week later already ready to fit in. Kira, on the last cucumber bed, said to Lydia, "Thank you. I thought that the village was boring. But it turned out that boring is doing nothing." Svetlana hugged the hostess and gave her oven mitts, sewn at night from old shirts. Petrovich and Andrei silently, as men can, took off their hats and nodded towards the fence. The contact person stood straight. Irina came in the evening, when the notebook with expenses on food was lying on the table, and said quietly, "I was wrong. We are used to you doing everything for us. I don't like to ask, because it seems weak, but you have shown that it is possible to ask honestly." Lydia felt in these words not a surrender of position, but a change. She answered, "Asking and demanding are not the same thing. You can ask, but you can't demand, even if you are a family." Irina nodded and transferred money for her share of the expenses without a reminder. On the last day, Andrei helped his mother disassemble the temporary mattresses, took out the trash, and assembled the barbecue. They sat on the porch and watched as the neighboring cat ran along the path, no longer a stranger. Andrei said, "Mom, I'm sorry I forced myself on you. I'm so used to you putting up with everything that I didn't even think to ask." Quote. Lydia replied, "It's never too late to ask. You're my son, you can ask, but you can't control my life. There's a difference." He sighed, leaned his elbows on his knees and said, "I get it." And that was the truth that would stay with him longer than his mother's lectures. When the last car with Irina's relatives turned onto the highway, Lydia entered the house and turned off the light in the room where no one else slept on an inflatable mattress. She closed the window, straightened the curtain, put a vase of apples on the table. She left the house rules on the refrigerator without taking them down. Let them hang there. Her house is for her first and foremost, and the rules in it are not about guests, they are about her. In the evening, Nikolai Ivanovich called and said, "Lydia Petrovna, you've really gone for it. Of course, I've seen camps, but for a private house to be put in order so quickly, it rarely happens." She laughed and replied, "This is not a camp, this is life with boundaries." He said, "Beautifully said." And he invited her to a street meeting in a week. "We will discuss lighting and a common garbage container. You have a good voice, people listen to you." A day later, Irina called. She said with a pause, "Thank you. And can I come in a week for one day without the crowd? I want to learn how to bake your pie with cottage cheese." Quote. Lydia smiled into the phone. "Yes, I can. But don't come for lunch, but at 9. We'll start with the well, then the pie." Quote. A quiet laugh was heard in the phone. "Agreed," Irina said. Lydia went out onto the porch. The garden rustled in its own way. The wind touched the leaves. The geranium on the windowsill reached for the light. She thought that the house turned out to be neither a refuge nor a fortress, but an adult playground on which, finally, she could stand with both feet. Here you didn't have to choose between being kind and being firm. Here you could be both, Because kindness without boundaries turns into convenience for others, and firmness without warmth into a desert. She locked the door and put the kettle on. The house sounded like a watch that doesn't need to be wound. It was already running on its own,